Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Tadej Blažič. I'm a freelance 3D designer and today we continue with part 2 of our MoGraph series. Now, if you haven't checked part 1 where we modeled our scene, I strongly suggest you do so you know where we're starting off. But you can also start this tutorial separately. Today we'll set up our plane model, learn some useful process optimizations, and finish the modeling portion of our series. In this lesson we take a look at several techniques including mirror, solidify, and simple deform modifiers, creating paths from existing models to control detailing on our plane, useful shortcuts for speeding up workflow, and array and curve modifier interaction. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. I'm going to go into front view by pressing 1 on my numpad, and I'm going to add a cube. So if you remember, Shift A, Mesh, and add cube. I'm going to move the cube with G on the X and Z axis, so I have it positioned a bit better. Okay, I'm going to move it slightly over, and I'm going to divide the screen. I can do that by going into the top right corner, clicking and holding on the corner and then dragging it down or to the left, whichever way I want my screen to be split. And I'm doing this because I'll be doing one front view and one top view. So on the right, I'm going to choose 7 on the numpad, and on the left, I'll have my front view, or rather side view of the plane. I'm going to scale this on the x-axis to about 2.1, so about here. Add a loop cut in edit mode. So I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode, Control R, and then set a loop cut in the actual object. I want to select the lower edge and then press G twice and move it up slightly. Next up, I'm going to select the right and left angle, and I'm going to scale them on the y-axis into sort of a almost square form, like so. I want to extend this front part just slightly, so I'm just going to select the front face and move it on the x-axis. When I'm happy with my shape, I'm just going to press Ctrl A, reset the scale, then I'm going to press Ctrl 2 to give it a subdivision surface. Now we can start on the front end. One of the ways to do the front end is to use the trick that we learned in the first part, which is using mean bevel weights and the bevel modifier. So if we want to do that, I want to first map out the form of the front engine. I'm going to do that by pressing I to inset. I'm just going to drag the face inside like so. And then I'm going to press I again, and I'm going to drag it in by holding Control and then dragging with my mouse. Now I'm going to add another loop cut, and I'm going to add it to the main body. Just Control R, select, and then I also can slide my mouse and select where my loop cut will be. So I want to have it right here. I'm going to go back to face select mode, and I'm going to choose the inner faces by holding Shift Alt and then selecting the face. I'm going to drag those closer. I'm going to scale those closer by pressing S, X. So I'm just dragging on the Y and Z axis. So I have a nice tight hole. Now, before I do anything else, I want to just separate this part of the object so I can work on it separately. Having selected these, we can also select the front faces, and we can select the loop, that's the first part of the engine. Press Shift D, which will duplicate our selection, and then press P, selection. This is going to separate our selection. I'm going to move this by pressing G Control 1 or 2 increments forward, and I'm doing that so because when we need to move it back, we know then exactly where to move it. And I'm just going to delete these faces over here. I'm going to also check through wireframe. I'm going to delete this face that's inside because we don't need it. And I'm perhaps going to delete also the front faces. So we have this. I'm going to select the engine again and move it back by 2 increments, maybe even less, let's say about here. Select the body again. Now we can select the edges, just the edges, S, X, and scale them down so they fit inside the actual engine, like so. Before we do anything else, I want to correct this geometry origin. So I'm just going to go Shift Control Alt C, origin to geometry. So now if we turn it around, it's behaving properly. Now for the engine part, I want to select the back edges over here and I want to give them a face, like so. Now you can see that we've lost a bit of our definition because of the actual subsurface modifier. We can correct that using the bevel. I'm going to add a bevel modifier, slide it before the actual subdivision, which gives us a result that looks like this. And I'm going to switch to weight. Now I'm going to go into edit mode again, press N, and in the item menu, I'm going to increase the mean bevel weight to 1. Also going to choose the front edge, and I'm going to increase the mean bevel weight there as well. Now that I have these guys sorted out, I just want to increase the segments slightly, maybe pull them back. I just want to see what happens to the edge. So I want to have a sharper or let's say smoother edge. Maybe smooth like that works fine. Now I want to select the back part of the engine, S, Shift X, and then rescale it so it's just outside of the body. Now if I want a bigger engine, I want to just move that on the X-axis like so. So I have a more full engine. Just going to press Ctrl A to reset the scale and to move out the menu, and I have my front end over here. I'm just going to shade smooth it, and I'm also going to shade smooth the body. This is going to be our front part of the engine. For our engine, we need a propeller. So the propeller will make it from a conical shape and then put the little propeller wings inside. Shift S, cursor to selected, and now we can add a cube, and that cube is going to be added directly where we've selected it. I'm going to scale it down and pull it forward slightly. Just want to correct this so I can see better what I'm doing. And now I want to work on this one. I need to have a sort of conical shape. So I'm just selecting the back faces. Again, going into mean bevel weight and adding a bevel modifier, which is going to work from weight, like so. I'm going to add a subdivision modifier. Now let's go into solid view. I'm just going to move this on the X-axis like so. Increase the subdivisions so I see a bit better what's happening, and maybe increase the segments. Offset, maybe I can put the offset to 0.15 like so. Shade smooth, and that's it. I just want to make it a bit more conical, so I'll just choose the front faces. You can also change it to face select in the front, S, Shift X, and then drop it down. Like so. Let's just fit the object. Before we do that, press Ctrl A for scale so we can see how it behaves. Nice. And now we can scale it down slightly and try to fit it inside the engine hole. Now we want to make the propeller wings. Shift A, mesh, plane. I'm going to move this plane forward a bit so I can see a bit better what's happening. Rotate it on the X-axis by 90 degrees. And when I have it rotated, I just want to match the height. I want to map out what the height is going to be. I'm going to add these wings at about here. So this is where I will be adding them, and this is going to be their height. So maybe I can actually just go choose the edge select, correct the height slightly, maybe drop it down. Then I want to go out of edit mode, scale on X-axis so they become thinner. When I have this form, you can see that our origin moved. Again, Shift Control Alt C, origin to geometry, Control A to reset the scale. Now I want to make this into a twisted shape. So before we start doing anything, I'm going to add a subdivision surface. The subdivision is going to be at 3, and I'm also going to add a solidify. This solidify, I'm going to set the offset to 0, and I'm going to increase the thickness to about, 0.1. Now that I have this, another thing you can also do is put the solidify before the actual subdivision so you don't have those sharp edges. I want to add a simple deform. And this is actually what is going to give us our propeller shape. Now, one thing you can do is just keep with this propeller shape. So you could just scale it up, go into side view, and then match it to your propeller, see what the height is. But we want to have 3 propellers, for example. How do we solve that problem? Well, first of all, I want to create this propeller to have a nice little bend shape. I want to go back into edit mode, and I want to scale the bottom part on the x-axis so it's a bit thinner. I can also scale again, shade smooth so I see a bit better what's happening, like so. I want to have 3 of these propeller wings distributed around the nose. Go into edit mode, select the bottom edge, press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then exit edit mode, Shift Control Alt C, origin to 3D cursor. That is going to put the origin to that 3D cursor. Now you can see that it also changed our deform, because deforms usually follow the point of origin, so we can just slightly adjust the angle. Now what we want to do is select our nose part, Shift S, cursor to selected, so our cursor is on the nose, select the propeller, Shift S, selection to cursor, and we have our propeller directly matched to the nose. We can do another thing here. To the top of the screen, transform pivot point and choose 3D cursor. Now if I Shift D, duplicate the object, press RX, so I'm rotating it on the x-axis, it's rotating around the actual point. Just going to move it on the x-axis about 120 degrees, Shift D to duplicate, RX 120 degrees. And we have them perfectly aligned. And selecting all of the propeller wings, selecting the nose last, Control P, and then object to keep transform. And now if we just choose our nose and rotate the nose, the propellers follow suit. This is our propeller sorted. Now we want to make our wings. Add another plane, and we're going to slide it back and slide it down, like so. I want to move this by pressing G, Y, and then I'm moving it so it's barely touching the red X line. I can also go into wireframe and check that it's barely touching it. In edit mode, I'm going to grab the outer side of the plane and drag it on the Y axis just a bit further out. Now I'll change to vertex select mode, and I'm going to choose the top vertex over here, press G twice and move it down so we have a slight bend, like so. I can also move it diagonally, like so, by again pressing G twice. Maybe we can give it just a slight diagonal over here. If we don't want to lose any time with modeling and repeating all of these steps, I'm just going to add a modifier, and I'm going to add a mirror modifier. So I'll uncheck the X and check the Y. And in this case, go again into wireframe mode, and I'll be choosing the vertices that are closest to the X red line. Shift S, cursor to selected, Shift Control Alt C, origin to 3D cursor, and now it's mapping correctly. I'm just going to grab these 2 vertices, so the ones that are outside of the plane, and I'm just going to drag them up slightly. So we have a bit of a bend. Maybe I'm going to drag also the back part of the plane like so, and the bottom like so. Now we can add a solidify modifier like we did before. We can maybe leave it at 0 and then increase the thickness to 0.2. Another thing we can do, subdivision surface, most definitely, and we'll add a bevel. Now the bevel, I'm going to put it before the actual subdivision surface, and I'm going to increase the subdivision to 2, yes. Shade smooth, so I can see a bit better what's happening with the plane. Maybe I can move it just forward slightly, like so. Now I also want to just correct the offset slightly, so the edges aren't as sharp as they are. And that's it for the wings. Now we can do the back part, so the smaller back wings. I'm just going to control here, see if I can maybe correct the shape slightly. I would like to just choose these two edges on top and drag them with G, maybe just slightly forward and slightly down, like so. So we have just a slightly different curvature, so a more cartoony curvature. I'm going to add a plane and I'm going to drag it just slightly above the back part of the body. Now before I start rotating, we have to change from 3D cursor to median port, so we can rotate the object around its median point. I'm going to scale this down slightly and I'm going to move it forward. Now we can repeat all of the steps that we did for the wings, but we can actually just copy the settings. The easiest way to do that is just select your plane and then select the wings last, press Ctrl L and then choose modifiers. This is going to copy all of the modifiers from the actual wings. In our case, we don't need the mirror, so we can just turn it off. And also we don't need the limit method to be none, but we need a weight. Set up the mean bevel weight. I'm going to go into wireframe, press N, so I have this transform menu over here, and I'm going to choose the bottom vertices and increase the mean bevel weight to 1. Back in my solid view, I can see what happened. Now I can just choose these vertices up here, move them on the x-axis if I want to make it sharper, and increase the subdivisions to 3, and I can also increase the thickness slightly, shade smooth, and that's it. I want to have also 2 of these wings on the sides, so I'm going to do basically the same principle as we did for the propeller. In wireframe, I'm going to choose the bottom vertices, Shift S cursor to select it, exit edit mode, Shift Control Alt C, origin to 3D cursor, then I'm going to change from median port to 3D cursor the pivot point, go into side view, and in this side view I'm going to Shift D, RX and rotate around the x-axis and position them as I want them to be positioned. Don't forget to change from 3D cursor to median port. I want to add some rivets. And the easiest way to do that is I'll just grab the front. So I'm just going to grab the nose. I'm going to duplicate the nose and I'm going to rotate it on the y-axis by 90 degrees. So I'm going to select the top vertices, and these top vertices I'm going to drag them down so I get a more rivet type shape. Control A for scale, so I'm correcting with scale. Shift Control Alt C and origin to geometry. I want to have this guy follow exactly the cylinder of the engine. One way of doing it is actually going into the engine, and I'm going to select this front edge over here. You can also go with edge select and select the front edge. I'm going to Shift D, duplicate this edge, and I'm going to move it forward. I'm going to press P to separate this object, so I have a separate circle. I don't need the bevel for this one, but I will leave the subdivision, and I'm going to press Alt C and change this from a mesh into a curve. So I have this perfect curve. Now, if I drag back this curve, press X, Shift X, and then scale it on the Y and Z axis, you can see that it fits the engine quite nicely. Just going to drag it even further, S, Shift X, like so. Shift Control Alt C, origin to geometry, so I have my origin over here. And now if I want to use this curve, go into my rivet, add a curve modifier, and now I want to select with the eyedropper the curve that I've just created. I want to select my curve, Shift S cursor to select it, and I want to select my rivet, Shift S selection to cursor, like so. So it follows the curve properly. Now that I have my rivet over here, I just want to scale it down, reset the scale, and I want to add a array modifier, and I want to move it before the curve modifier. So I want to change the X relative offset to 0, and I want to set the Z offset to 1. Now I can increase the count of the pivots and they will follow the curve exactly along the plane. Increase this offset so that they hug the plane a bit better. So I just set up 12 of these and I'm just correcting the offset so it follows the engine. And that's it for our engine detail. Last thing, I want to add a cockpit. So I'm just going to add a mesh, a cube. I'm going to move the cube back, up slightly, scale it down, Control A to reset the scale, Control 2 to add a subdivision of 2. And now I'm just going to SX, so scale on the X-axis, like so. And I'm going to push it down so it sits inside of the plane body, like so. Shade smooth this one. Increase the viewport and render to 3. That's it for the modeling part. Last thing I want to do is I want to parent some of these objects. So I'm going to choose the engine. I'm going to choose the rivets and the circle for the rivets. I'm going to choose the cockpit, the back wings, and I'm going to choose the wings themselves. Select the body last, press Ctrl P, object keep transform. So when we move the body, everything else follows it. So this is it for this tutorial. This is our plane finished. In our next tutorial, we'll take a look at animation, how to rotate the propeller, how to keyframe your plane, and how to keyframe your clouds for movement. So see you in the next one.